Welcome back to the channel. This will be the best wildcard team for Double Gameweek 26, and Arsenal are top of the clean sheet odds according to fantasyfootballpundit.com. The only number that hasn't been updated yet is actually their percentage against Wolves, so I've put 58%. I will provide the definitive number in the deadline stream on Tuesday, so be sure not to miss it and don't be caught out by the early deadline. But against Brentford, they have a 42% probability, which would put them in 5th spot alongside Liverpool. But Man City are second, facing Fulham at home with almost a 50% chance of a clean sheet. Nottingham Forest are third and Crystal Palace are fourth, and that's why Daniel Munoz looks very appealing with those fixtures against Burnley and Wolves at home back to back. After Liverpool, who face Sunderland away, there is Chelsea against Leeds at home with a 38% probability, and in last spot is Fulham, who only have an 11% chance of keeping a clean sheet at the Etihad. In my team selection video, I'll show you the top 10 captains, and keep your eyes peeled for the transfer tips, where I'll highlight 11 players to buy, hold, sell and skip, and some one-week punts for Double Gameweek 26, and one of them is in incredible form across all competitions. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date on my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy, and very soon the Champions League will return with the knockout phase playoffs, so stay tuned for that. There will be matchday 9 content headed your way very soon, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships. Fair likes to my videos, proud to comments, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. David Raya is only 1 point behind Jordan Pickford after that 7-pointer against Sunderland. He had a few shaky moments in that game, but he also made a few decent saves to keep that clean sheet. And Arsenal have kept 13 for the season. They've already matched last season's tally, where Raya won the Golden Glove yet again, and he could make it 3 in a row here. And Arsenal are also in a commanding position before the game between Liverpool and Man City. It's worth noting that this video is recorded on Sunday morning, so there will be some updates in terms of future videos with that information in mind. The same goes for Crystal Palace against Brighton. But I think Raya, facing Brentford away, his former club, and Wolves, I think he has a great chance of a clean sheet, which I showed you towards the beginning of this video. And Arsenal have the best defence and great fixtures from now until the end of the season. There will be a few exceptions to that, like Man City away, but on the whole, it's looking very solid. But because they're doubling in 26, they will blank in Gameweek 31, just like Crystal Palace, Man City, and also Arsenal, of course. So I'd be very mindful about that. Be very careful about investing too much in these teams. I'm not even going to say Wolves, because the only player I'd really recommend is Mane as a third forward and 8th attacker, but I don't think it's really worth the investment. And the only reason why I'm entertaining it for my own squad is to fund a move for a third Arsenal asset for Double Gameweek 26. But David Raya could be your seventh forget goalkeeper from now until the end of the season. And the same goes for the backup, Martin Dubravka, who has 75 FPL points, which is a great return for a 4 million goalkeeper. And I can only see him starting once, possibly twice, until Gameweek 38, because David Raya would be more than enough, even in the tougher games, because Arsenal have a very solid defence. And doubling up on the Gunners is my recommendation, whilst it isn't essential. And for those looking to triple up, that would be a decent idea. There are plenty of options in the midfield and forward line who are showing good form for Arsenal. And in my opinion, the best asset overall from the Gunners lies in that defence, and he could be captained in Double Gameweek 26. There are even conversations about triple captaining Gabriel Magalhaes, and I don't really disagree with that. I'm probably going to save it for Gameweek 36, where Man City could have a pretty reasonable double against Brentford and Burnley, and Erling Haaland would be my preference in terms of that particular chip, despite his recent form. And Gabriel has been incredible in FPL terms since returning from that injury, and when he has started for Arsenal, he's only blanked once, and that was against Manchester United in a 3-2 loss. So I think Gabriel is a very solid and dependable captaincy option. He was a bit underwhelming against Sunderland. He got the clean sheet, but only 6 points, which paled in comparison to Cole Palmer's hat-trick and Bruno Fernandes getting 10 points. But I think Gabriel in this double game could still be the highest scoring player, and you will see my top 10 list. Gabriel is certainly in the top 3. I'll spoil that now. But in terms of number 1, well, we'll find out very soon if he does make the mark. But I think with defenders, he is the only one I'd consider captaining at this moment in time, although some of you might highlight Daniel Munoz against Burnley and Wolves at home. And speaking of which, he does make it into this team, but only as a short-term punt. And be very mindful about Blank Gameweek 31, because if you've got a trip up in Arsenal, you've got Daniel Munoz and a City player or two, you'd probably force yourself into free hitting in Gameweek 31, which is absolutely fine. But if you don't have the free hit, I will discuss some alternative picks just so you're not in a very precarious situation. We do get plenty of free transfers from now until Blank Gameweek 31, but with some of those, you'll be looking to optimize this double gameweek coming up. So that might force you to take a hit or two if you don't have the free hit chip available. But I do like Daniel Munoz at 5.8 million on paper. We know the quality of the player and the high ceiling he possesses. We all know his potential with different routes to points, and he scored in the reverse fixture against Burnley. Those 2 home games coming up are very appealing for Crystal Palace, and if there was one asset I would recommend, it would be Daniel Munoz. But for that premium price tag, you need some consistency, and we haven't seen that for a while. He was out with an injury for a couple of months, and Palace have also declined massively since October, where they were 4th in the Premier League table, but they've really struggled since then in terms of keeping clean sheets and getting points on the board, with many losses in that time frame as well. But the third defender I'm going for here is from Man City in Mark Gay, and I think there are a few problems with this particular pick because he blanks in Gameweek 31. The double for Man City will likely be in double Gameweek 36, but there is a chance, of course, of 33, and it will be covered on this channel. But there's also the fact that City concede so many big chances, even in games that they win or keep a clean sheet. So there isn't really a degree of sustainability when it comes to their defensive output. But Mark Gay is still one of the highest scoring defenders in Fantasy Premier League, mainly because of his work at Crystal Palace for the first half of the season. And this is one option that I'd be quite open to changing to Tarkowski, Virgil van Dijk, or even a cheaper defender like Matty Cash, because Aston Villa have a decent fixture in Blank Gameweek 31, which could also help you navigate that particular blank without using the free hit chip. So I'm quite open to selling Mark Gay. And for the next 2 gameweeks specifically, you might be inclined to go for Chalobah, but Chelsea have poor fixtures from Gameweek 28 onwards, and that's why I wouldn't be too bullish on tripling up on the Blues. And in terms of their defense, I think 1 is more than enough. Having 2 would be overkill. But there are 2 spots left in this defensive line, and they will be budget options, and Hill is going to be one of them. If you have enough money, you can upgrade him to Senesi, who would be yet another option to replace Mark Gay with, by the way, but I wouldn't double up on the Cherries defensively. In fact, with all Premier League teams except Arsenal, I wouldn't really advocate for those defensive double-ups because I don't trust them to keep those clean sheets. The same goes for Everton with Tarkowski, Michael Keane, and Jordan Pickford in goal. I think you just pick one, and I think with the rest, you sort of avoid them for the time being. Alderete is the final defender, and you could upgrade him to Mukiele if you have more money at your disposal, but my only concern with this defensive line really is the fact that the structure is a little bit imbalanced because you've got 2 premiums in Gabriel Munoz, a mid-priced option in Mark Gay, and of course those 3 will blank in Gameweek 31, and then you've got these 2 budget defenders, so it makes it a bit more difficult and tricky to navigate out of it unless you've got money in the bank, or maybe you've got just a bit of a different structure and situation compared to myself. But that's one thing I would probably look to possibly change in this defensive line, especially over the coming weeks. I think there aren't many standouts in this position. Timber would be a great option, but he also blanks in 31, and with David Raya in goal, that would mean a triple up, or you move the goalkeeper a little bit, and that's where Pickford or Roofs would come into play. I wouldn't go for any other goalkeeper at the moment, but Robert Sanchez is still decent, and there are a few others where that came from, Kelleher and Verbruggen, who do rotate quite well, but I don't think it's necessary. So just stick with one of Raya, Pickford, or Roofs, and I would double up on the Arsenal defence, despite them blanking in Gameweek 31. But I think with Munoz and Gay in particular, you could consider a move here and there to Van Dijk, possibly Matty Cash, and then use those extra funds to upgrade one of the other defenders so you've got more of a balanced defensive line. Let me know your thoughts down the comment section below. But up next is the midfield, where we have even more options at our disposal, and you could argue many standouts, but the template is changing a little bit. Harry Wilson has been brilliant all season. He has blanked in 2 consecutive games, so there is definitely a case of selling him to another budget midfielder and also spending more money in this position. After blanking in 4 consecutive games, Declan Rice got a 5-pointer against Sunderland and came very close to scoring, which would have boosted his score quite considerably. He secured DEFCON against the Black Cats and also kept the clean sheet, but it wasn't anything spectacular from Declan Rice, so it's always a threat, and I think he'll be a consistent option from now until the end of the season, and even after Double Gameweek 26 against Tottenham and Chelsea, I think Rice could return in those big games, but of course he blanks in 31, you have to be quite wary about that, but you've also got this double coming up against Brentford and Wolves away, so Rice is worth the price tag at 7.5 million. Zubimendi has also been quite impressive with back-to-back 10-pointers, and he's significantly cheaper than Declan Rice, but in terms of other Arsenal midfielders, I probably wouldn't recommend anybody else. Bukayo Saka will likely miss Double Gameweek 26, and whilst there is a chance he returns before the North London derby, that doesn't mean he'll start in those games. And against Wolves away, for example, if he's fit enough to make the squad, I don't think he'll start that particular match. So I think Rice would suffice, and the same goes for Bruno Fernandes, who is the highest scoring midfielder in the game. He costs 9.8 million now, so he keeps rising in price. I've lost track of his actual price tag at this point, and I bought him in relatively early, but I'm still kicking myself about not buying him in even earlier before the Man City game, because I was so bullish about him returning in that game. But I looked at the Arsenal fixture, and that was enough to put me off. But Fernandes has only blanked once out of the last 8 game weeks, and I think the returns will keep on flowing, despite the fact that United's fixtures aren't particularly great in the medium to long term, but there are still going to be a few matches like West Ham away, which look very appealing on the eye, and Man United could make it 5 consecutive wins for the first time in over a year or two, so it has been a while, but Michael Carrick has done very well so far, and there is a manager bounce, but let's see if this translates into something sustainable and also long-term, but I think there are some very positive signs here for the Red Devils. The third midfielder is Morgan Rogers. I do like Aston Villa's fixtures coming up. That includes Brighton at home in Double Gameweek 26, and I think Rogers, with that 10-pointer against Bournemouth, showed what he can do. I don't think he's a must-have, and compared to Antoine Semenyo, you could certainly make a case for going for the Ghanaian instead, but once again, you're going to have another Blank Gameweek 31 player, and in terms of doubling up on City or having those Double Gameweek assets, that'd mainly be for the long term in Gameweek 36, which is the most likely. So I think Rogers would be definitely a viable option in the midfield, and the best Aston Villa asset, even over Ollie Watkins up front, who started in Gameweek 25 against Bournemouth, but he blanked, and Rogers got a 10-pointer in that particular game. Now, one option who has been outstanding recently is Elliot Anderson. I believe he hasn't blanked in 11 consecutive matches, and he's always getting DEFCON, even when Nottingham Forest are dropping points, and they lost quite comprehensively on Friday. Anderson made a mistake which led to a goal, but he is getting defensive contributions so consistently, and when he adds a goal or assist on top of it, you're just going to get some massive returns from him. And I know there's Garner and a few other midfielders like Dewsbury Hall who could be very appealing as well. I would definitely highlight him at 4.9 million, but I think Anderson's consistency is unrivaled at this price tag and below, and he can give you 4 to 5 points as a baseline score, and anything else would be a bonus. But the last midfielder is from Liverpool, and whilst I do like Antoine Semenyo and a few other midfielders like Enzo Fernandez and Cole Palmer, I'm opting for Florian Wirtz in this situation. If you have a lot of money in the bank and your squad value is ridiculous, then Wirtz to Palmer would be a recommendation of mine, and that can also be aided by downgrading Munoz to Matty Cash as one particular example, and even Mark Gay to a cheaper defender, but not so cheap that's very similar to Alderete and Hill in this setup, because I think that imbalances the defence even further. But Wirtz is definitely here on merit with 6 goals out of the last 10 matches before the Man City game, and he's showing a lot of form right now. But in the Premier League, it's still only 3 goals and 2 assists, so we'll see if he can add to those numbers fairly soon. But against Sunderland away, and with Liverpool being near the top of the fixture difficulty rating until Gameweek 31, I think it's worth having 1 or 2 Liverpool assets, and the others to highlight would be Van Dijk in that defensive line and Ekitike up front. Another player who keeps rising in price is Joao Pedro. He costs 7.6 million. There is certainly a debate here that we are a bit too late to the party in terms of investing in Joao Pedro if we haven't done so already, but I still think over the next 2 game weeks the ceiling is very high. He could be considered as an alternative captaincy option if you're not really feeling the Arsenal players in that double game week, and we have seen a degree of consistency from him under Liam Rosenau, and he won a penalty against Wolves. He got 2 fantasy assists, and he also has done very well across all competitions. A brace against Napoli, a goal against Brentford, and some massive returns in FPL as well, with bonus points potential, and he's also getting goals and assists. He would be third in command for penalties behind Enzo Fernandez, and when Palmer's on the pitch, we saw against Wolves, he took 2 of them and scored a hat-trick in the first half. But Joao Pedro is still worth considering, and that's why he could be a placeholder for Igor Thiago, who could be bought in from Gameweek 27 and beyond. Erling Haaland is still here, and one thing we discussed in the reaction stream yesterday, a lot of viewers were pointing out the fact that we could sell Haaland to Ekitike and then spread those funds around by Palm in the midfield, and that's something I would entertain with Man City blanking in 31, but their fixtures coming up are very enticing on paper, and I would back Erling Haaland to score a few goals in that time frame and get back to what we know from him. I don't think he'll be a standout captaincy option like he was at the beginning of the season, but I think he'll be in the conversation all the time, and against Fulham at home, he would still be in the top 5 in my opinion. The last forward is going to be very tough because we're going for a budget option, and Mane has a double game week against Nottingham Forest and Arsenal. But long term, I think Kruppi Jr. is superior. And honestly, a double that comprised of Arsenal for bottom of the league Wolves. I know they did very well at the Emirates and were unlucky not to walk away with something back in December, but I still think Kruppi offers more consistency. With 8 goals this season, he's fixture proof and he's got 11 starts in the Premier League now, and that's only going to intensify with Kluivert and Tavernier out injured. But Tavernier will be back fairly soon in a couple of weeks' time, so that could be for Game Week 27. I still think Kruppi Jr. will continue to start, but let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you had to opt for a budget striker, would it be Mane or Kruppi Jr.? My preference long-term would be with the Frenchman, and I think leading the line for the Cherries or playing as a secondary striker to Evanesson, he could do a very good job, and he has scored against some of the best teams in the world and in the Premier League, like Arsenal, back in January as well. So that completes the 50-man squad. It's a solid foundation. I think the weakest link would be the defensive line, but I will go to FPL.team, discuss some alternatives, and that could include selling Erling Haaland and spreading the funds around, and that would give me enough funds to buy Cole Palmer in the midfield, which would be very appealing for the next couple of game weeks. Between the sticks, I would start David Raya against Brentford and Wolves away and complete the Arsenal triple up with Gabriel as the captain and Declan Rice as the vice. Daniel Munoz and Mark Gay complete the defensive line, which looks quite solid for Game Week 26, but I do recognise that in the long term there would be some problems, especially for Blank Gameweek 31. Bruno Fernandes up against West Ham away would be very appealing on paper, and he would be one of the standout captaincy options for the double, especially if you're looking beyond Arsenal and you want either a Man United or Chelsea player with their appealing fixtures on paper. Morgan Rogers is up against Brighton at home. I think that's quite solid, and I'd be very happy to start him. The same goes for Anderson, facing Wolves at home, and Florian Wirtz away to Sunderland, with João Pedro facing Leeds. He'd be the only Chelsea player in this squad, but very soon I think people will be looking to trim down their Chelsea assets, with the exception of Cole Palmer, and Erling Haaland is facing Fulham at home. He would still be a captaincy consideration, but not as high as Bruno Fernandes and João Pedro based on recent form. On my bench, I've got Dubravka, Kruppi Jr., Hill, and Alderete, which doesn't look great, but there is decent squad depth there, and those two Bournemouth players in particular look very appealing, and they could do well against Everton away. I've got nothing left over in the bank, and my squad value is 102.5 million. The expected points is decent at 70.6, and somehow my provisional Game Week 26 team selection is even higher, but I'm not sure if I agree with that when I look at some of these assets like Daniel Munoz, who I would like to have for a game week like this. But let's play around with this a little bit and also focus on something that would help you in terms of navigating Game Week 31 without the use of the free hit, and this could include selling Erling Haaland and going to Ekitike, and then we've got so much money at our disposal. Wirtz could become Cole Palmer, and we could also go from Mark Gay to Virgil van Dijk as well, and have 2 Liverpool players, and that looks very solid too. I still like Daniel Munoz, but if you are very wary about Game Week 31, I'd still go for the triple up in Arsenal because they've got the double right now, and that Wolves fixture looks particularly appealing. I also think Raya, Gabriel and Rice will start both matches, but it also wouldn't completely surprise me to see some key Arsenal players being rested for that Wolves game, but against Brentford, I just don't see Arsenal rotating too much there. And I think Morgan Rogers would be another one that you could consider offloading. And if Brian Mbeumo is fit against West Ham, you could also stretch to him or use the extra funds to upgrade Anderson. And then we've got 8.2 million, and that's where Wirtz could come into play. You would probably be 0.2 million out of budget in terms of what I've got at my disposal. So that is something else to think about. But Anderson to Wirtz could also work, or even Antoine Semenyo, and he could be your only Man City player. And then you've only got, let's say here, 5 players who blank in 31, of course. That wouldn't be ideal. But then Munoz could also become Tarkowski or Michael Keane. But Everton's fixtures coming up are quite poor. And a lot of people in the recent reaction stream were asking me about selling Tarkowski to Munoz, which I completely understand. I don't see a massive difference between the two, maybe over the next 2 game weeks. But beyond that, I think it's very evenly matched. And Tarkowski could still outscore the Colombian from now until the end of the season. So I honestly wouldn't mind having a Tarkowski in here. And if you are quite unhappy about your goalkeepers for 31 because you would be forced to start Dubravka for that blank game week, then that's where Pickford or Russ would come into play. But this week, it doesn't look great because Liverpool are facing Sunderland, and with Everton facing Bournemouth, That's not too shabby. I think Everton could keep a clean sheet there, and I think that looks pretty solid. But if you were quite conscious of Double Gameweek 26 and also Blank Gameweek 31, I'd stick with the Arsenal triple up, but maybe get rid of the likes of Munoz, Semenyo in this case, and Mark Gay. But as you can see, you've got plenty of money to also experiment and go for your preferences. I have highlighted the best players in each position. So up front, it would be Joao Pedro, Ekitike, Haaland. And from Gameweek 27 onwards, I'd highly recommend Igor Thiago, who scored against Newcastle in that 3-2 victory from the penalty spot yet again. But he was also booked and got no bonus points this time round. In the midfield, Bruno Fernandes, Mbeumo, Rodgers, Semenyo, Wirtz, Rice, Palmer. In terms of differentials or budget picks, I think Zubimendi is decent. Elliot Anderson, though, is even better. And Dewsbury Hall should be considered at 4.9 million. In that defense, Daniel Munoz, Timber, Gabriel for sure. He is my favorite pick of them all. Virgil van Dijk, Matty Cash, Alderete, Hill, Mukiele, and Senesi. I wouldn't double up on any defense except for Arsenal, but those are the players I would hone in on in this position. And you know my thoughts on the goalkeepers. Go for one of Raya, Pickford, or Roofs, and Dubravka is all you need as the backup. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date on my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Let's get this video in particular to over 100 likes and closing on new goals like 39k subscribers on YouTube. Follow me on X, Instagram, and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, fair likes to my videos, proud to comments, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League, and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you on Tuesday for the upcoming deadline stream. Stay tuned for the Champions League, which will return the week after with Matchday 9 content. And I'm also planning to do a Transfer Tips podcast with 11 players highlighted to buy, hold, sell, and skip. FPL Challenge, the top 10 captains, and my transfer plans will all be covered in the team selection video.